My name is Norma Day Vines, and I'm a professor of counseling and human development in the School of Education. Please allow me to welcome each of you to the JHU Forum on Race on behalf of the Office of President Ron Daniels, the Office of Provost Sunil Kumar, the Center for Africana Studies, the Diversity Leadership Council, the Black Student Union, the Black Faculty and Staff Association, the Latino Alliance, the Office of Institutional Equity, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and Student Affairs. In 2015, Johns Hopkins sponsored the first Forum on Race in the aftermath of Freddie Gray and other national issues on race and inequality. The university sponsors these and similar events to demonstrate a commitment to diversity, community service, inclusion, and academic freedom. Tonight, we will continue in this same tradition. Before the dawn of every century, leading scholars speculate about what issues will compel the next generation. In 1903, Harvard-trained sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois noted that the problem of the 20th century would be the problem of the color line. Here we've moved well into the second decade of the 21st century, and issues of race and representation have become far more noxious, intricate, and differentiated. In fact, we no longer discuss race as an isolated construct because during more contemporary times, people are impacted by multiple overlapping social identities that extend beyond a black-white binary and include but are not limited to race, ethnicity, gender, religion, social class positionality, sexual orientation, immigration status, ability, disability, linguistic origin, and religious affiliation. People's sociocultural and sociopolitical realities are far more layered and nuanced. As such, we're ushering in a new generation of young activists who represent a variety of constituent groups, exercise innovative approaches to social protest, and exhibit vast amounts of courage and a fierce determination to achieve social justice and systemic change. This panel discussion will further illuminate our understanding of the overlapping, interacting, and intersecting dimensions of identity and explore the specific and unique approaches our panelists enlist in order to speak truth to power. In 1970, singer-songwriter and activist Gil Scott-Heron said, "The revolution will not be televised because it would be live." Many of us who were around then assumed he was writing figuratively. What we didn't know at the time is that the millennial generation would use their power, privilege, and spheres of influence to take activism to cyberspaces like Facebook Live, Instagram Live, Periscope, YouNow, StreamUp, and The Tempest. That they would use technological advances to mobilize constituents and dismantle varying forms of oppression. They have created their own unique spaces, cyber and otherwise, to promote understanding of the issues, to counter mainstream narratives which are often exclusionary, marginalizing, myopic, and to call to action not only other millennials, but Gen Xers and baby boomers in order to eradicate systematic forms of structural racism and discrimination. There is an African proverb that says, "As long as the lions have no historians, the tale of the hunt will glorify the hunter." Thank you again for sharing this evening with our carefully selected panel of lions and lionesses. At this time, I turn the program over to Provost Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Day Vines, and thanks to everyone for being here. As was mentioned, my name is Sunil Kumar. I'm the provost of the university. I've been in this position for 6 months. If you don't know what a provost does, you're probably better off for not knowing. I spend most of my day saying no to people. I'm a head bureaucrat, if you will. And so for me, this is the third forum on race in America that I'm attending. And each of those forums gives me a pleasure that I miss in my bureaucratic day job. And that is, I get to learn. And so while our moderator already talked about the various initiatives the university has taken, to achieve greater diversity, and many of them are listed in our roadmap, which you can find on the Provost Office website. For me, this forum, I will today, especially given today's topic, I'll just mention is a personal pleasure for me, because I get to sit, be a little uncomfortable, and learn. And I used to do that far more regularly when I was just a faculty member, and I do it far less regularly now. And so I expect to learn, and what better topic to learn about than the intersecting dimensions of identity: complex, profound, and practically important. So I look forward to our outstanding panel today, and so the only job they really trust me with is to introduce the panelists, which is a pleasure, of course. Laila Alawa is founder and chief executive of The Tempest, an online media outlet focused on telling stories and magnifying the voices of millennial women from all diverse backgrounds. The Tempest has connected millions of people with more than 700 female thought leaders on every issue conceivable, filling a void in the mass media landscape and disrupting the status quo. In articles, columns, videos, and podcasts, Ms. Alawa and her contributors span the entire globe and attend to the widest range of issues from ethnicity, race, and culture, and more. Prior to founding the company, she worked at the White House and in Congress. She also served as a research specialist at Princeton University, studying socio-cognitive processing under the framework of community identity and belonging. In the course of her work at The Tempest, Ms. Alawa has become a go-to source for journalists around the globe, including those at the New York Times, The Guardian, and CNN Money. Peyton Head formerly represented 28,000 students at the University of Missouri as the school's student government president. In the aftermath of a fatal police-involved shooting in Ferguson, he spearheaded conversations about improving race relations in Missouri. His social media postings detailing his experience with racism at Missouri ignited students to fight for a more inclusive campus. Mr. Head received an NAACP Image Award titled "Courage Will Not Skip This Generation," and he was featured in Spike Lee's ESPN documentary, Two Fists Up. A member of the LGBTQ community, Mr. Head facilitates dialogue on the intersection of race and sexual identities. He has presented at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, addressed the White House Initiative on HBCUs, and helped organize and present at the first White House convening for diversity and inclusion in higher ed. A contributing writer for Huffington Post, he has been featured in national media outlets such as CNN, MSNBC, ABC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Mo Speller is a PhD student here at Johns Hopkins University. His working dissertation title is Intersecting Streets, Redlining, and Community Development in 20th Century St. Louis. His scholarship is concerned with the development of post-war housing codes, their relationship to historical color lines in the city, and how code enforcement can be used to demarcate neighborhood boundaries and police issues of race, class, and gender. Hopefully soon to be Dr. Speller won the 2015 Student Paper Prize from the Society for American City and Regional Planning History for his work From Redliners to Reinvestors, Subdividing the City of St. Louis in the 1970s. He has served as the program assistant for the JHU program in Racism, Immigration, and Citizenship, and he was awarded a Diversity Leadership Council grant in 2014 to carry out a restroom inventory at Hopkins. The safe and accessible restroom assessment made several suggestions to facilities about how to improve restroom access for transgender and gender variant students, women, people with physical disabilities, and parents with young children. His recent intercession course, Gayborhood Histories, explores how gender and sexuality have come to be seen as spatialized and marketable. Finally, we have Monica Yorkman. Ms. Yorkman is one of Baltimore's most prominent transgender activists. In 2006, Ms. Yorkman founded the Sisters of the T, an outreach, education, and advocacy organization that works with transgender women of color who engage in commercial sex work. In 2013, she co-founded the Baltimore Transgender Alliance as a means to unify Baltimore's trans communities, empower trans and gender nonconforming individuals, and increase their political effectiveness. Ms. Yorkman comes from a family of activists. Her mother, Doris, played a leadership role in a neighborhood voter registration drive in the 1960s. Her father marched with Dr. King and was present for the "I've Got a Dream" speech. They instilled in her the belief that change has to come from inside and outside of systems, and she obviously has put that belief into action. Please join me in welcoming our panelists today. And finally, before I end, I'd like to thank all the people who made today possible: the Diversity Leadership Council, the Black Students Union, the Black Faculty and Staff Association, the Center for Africana Studies, the Latino Alliance, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, the Office of Institutional Equity, Student Affairs, the Office of the President, and my own office. Thank you all.
Okay, as we get started, I'd just like to ask some introductory questions. The first question that I'd like to ask the panelists is to briefly describe some of the personal factors that have contributed to your involvement and investment in social activism. And we don't have to go in any particular order.
Anybody want to go first?
You do.
Okay. Well, that's a really good question. For me, I guess my activism started at an early age. I was this black kid living in Chicago, and for me, I didn't know how I would ever be able to tell my family that I was gay. For me, race wasn't so much of a salient issue coming from the South Side and the South suburbs of Chicago, which are predominantly black. But sexuality was. It was something that I was bullied for, and it was something that I knew that someday I would have to come into my own and recognize that, you know, I'm powerful, I'm wonderful, just the way I am. And when I got to college, this is when I started to realize this more than ever. At Mizzou, I saw so many different, I guess, units of different student identities being sectioned off. And I felt like I didn't fit in with the black kids, even though I was a member of the black student government, that I was too gay for the black kids and then too black for the gay kids, the LGBTQ Center, where I often heard racist things being said, or our Black Culture Center, where I often heard homophobic things being said. So because of that, I decided to work with all of our different marginalized communities on campus to run for student body president at Mizzou. And I was told that I wouldn't do it. I was told that I wouldn't be able to do it, not only because I was black, I wasn't a Missourian, and I wasn't straight. And I just remember having this feeling of just like, it was just a really nasty pit in my stomach throughout the entire election process, because I really didn't think that I could do it. And I had the audacity, people looked at me like I had the audacity to try. And so my vice president, we came together, and she's Afro-Latina, and we decided that we would embark on this mission that wasn't quite completed before, to be the first black elected student leaders at the University of Missouri together on one ticket. And students came in overwhelming numbers to come to the polls and voted, and we ended up having the highest voter turnout in the history of the university. More people voted in our election than they vote in the Missouri House of Representatives. And our campaign was entitled Ignite Mizzou. We didn't think that Mizzou would actually be ignited. But it was this idea that we were coming together and seeing that it was the 175th anniversary of the university, which was a really big deal. Everybody made a big deal out of it. But had only been 60 years that black students like ourselves had been admitted. Hence the name Concerned Student 1950, 1950, the first year that black students were admitted, the year that my mom was born. And so we really decided to embark on a campaign that would create conversations about the changes that needed to happen on campus for every single type of student. And that's how we came into office. And so we'll probably get into it a little bit later, but we had a series of challenges that we were going through. This was the fall of 2014. We were dealing with the university's inaction and silence to what was happening just 2 hours away in Missouri, in Ferguson, where nobody wanted to take a stance and nobody wanted to say anything. And I remember when we were first elected, we got the transition binder. I was moving into my new office and everything. And the student body president before me told me, with her all-white cabinet, to not take a stance on Ferguson. And I just remember thinking how much of a privilege that must be for something to be a national and international issue hitting so close to home, affecting a good majority of our students who live right next door in St. Louis. And we're supposed to stay silent. So the very first thing I did was put out an email after my inauguration that went to the entire student body that talked about how student government would be addressing some of these issues on campus. And we weren't trying to create an us versus them divide between our administration. It eventually led to that after the conversations continued to be dismissed. But I think that's where a lot of it fueled from, just the experience of not feeling at home, not feeling welcome, not feeling included. And that actually made me feel more included doing that work. It was the social justice community at Mizzou where I found my home. So I don't necessarily look at it as you know, activism, rah, 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 but it was more of just like, I was just trying to figure out how to survive and get through my 4 years at Mizzou. And thank goodness for the Black Studies Department and our LGBTQ resource centers, which I worked with both sides to make them more inclusive for all different communities. But sometimes it just takes saying something. I think the word activist is so stigmatized because they make it seem like there's one way to do it. There's multiple ways to go about it, and that's what we saw at Mizzou. So that's a little bit about me and what kind of fueled me to be in this position where I am today, and I thank you all for listening and coming out.
Maybe we'll just go in table order, I think. So I'm very much humbled to be here. I'm even more like, what, am I rah-rah activist? But one of the ways I come to thinking through activism is also through my work as a scholar and as a historian. I look at various ways that people have tried to improve their communities and housing available to them in St. Louis, but also some of both the unintended consequences in terms of reifying certain lines of race, gender, and class that will often result from certain ideas of community in activism. And then as kind of as a student at Hopkins, I've been somewhat active around, I've become like the bathroom person, I realized, because I got all these emails after the flyer about the forum went around where people are like, can you look at my bathroom? Can you tell me about the bathroom? But so just a little bit about how I got into that project. Was through thinking about bathroom spaces as a trans person at Hopkins and as a person who, thankfully not at Hopkins, but in other contexts has faced physical threats because of my gender expression. Sites like bathrooms can be very anxiety-provoking for me. And so I started thinking about how gendered the bathrooms were here, but also like in being attentive to bathrooms, started thinking about other types of people that are excluded on campus implicitly by the bathroom access that we have available. So working with parents who require lactation spaces or who might want to have a single stall bathroom to help their child of an opposite gender use the restroom. And also, one of the big things that I noticed was, one, how much the history of Hopkins as being an all-men's college is very much alive and well in terms of some of the buildings have the women's restrooms were kind of inserted as an afterthought, or there's not as many women's restrooms as men's restrooms. And also that many of the major institutional buildings don't have basic ADA compliance in most of the bathrooms, or in a large number of the bathrooms. So thinking through, so these things helped me to also consider like my privilege as an able-bodied person, that I hadn't worried about that until I started thinking about my own issues about bathrooms. And it also, through conversations with a variety of people, introduced me to larger ways to have coalitions on campus and to think about the different ways that these very basic kinds of accommodations can make people feel excluded on campus or hinder the work of learning that we're trying to do here.
So first I'm going to say good evening to you all and thank you for being here. For me, it's incredible to see so many brown and black faces in the audience at Hopkins. That is like something that I've wished for a long time, but I never knew that I would live to see. And so when I think about this question, I just think about, I was just brought up with a sense of right and wrong, and it had to do with treating people equally. And combining that with a way of me never being able to keep my mouth shut. So those two going hand in hand equal to what they call activism. And so the first example I can think of was being about 5 years old, and that was 1959, and a kid at school being bullied, and taking up for this kid, and then getting beat up. And going back to my mother and saying, well, I'm just trying to do the right thing. And my mother saying, well, this child was white. And so when you side with a white kid, you know, this is what's going to happen. And I said, but you told me that we're all equal. And if we're all equal, then why should I be singled out? That's not right. And so something has been embedded in me for a long time about what's right and what's not right. And so if we're all equal, we're all equal. And so my life has taken a pattern that way. And so some things are sort of embedded in me. And I guess when I was about 4 years old, I knew I was a girl. There was never language. Mm-hmm. And so there was a struggle in me about what's right. And so that's wrapped up in this. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there's been that pattern. When I was 16, there was a girl in my class who was being abused by her father, and so I snuck her into my basement. And the thing that confused my parents is, why don't you, it would be one thing if I was trying to do something with the girl and I got caught, but she was in the basement and they caught me coming up from the basement, and so they wanted to know, well, what are you coming up through the basement of your own house for? And what it turned out to be, and when they found out the whole story, and when they contacted this girl's father, and then they found out that the father didn't want the girl, and then they found out what my motive was, they were really confused. And so the way it ties in is that there were all of these instances in my life that left my parents confused about me. I was never confused about me. The only thing that caused confusion about me was never having language to understand me and fighting against systems that left me not able to advocate for myself. And so I was very good at advocating for others, but struggled to advocate for myself. And it wasn't until, and I shared this story earlier with the professor, it wasn't to me almost dying till I finally found the courage and the voice to advocate for myself. And then found myself in situations where I advocated for others, because I found out that others were dying at an earlier age than me through violence and through discrimination and through lack of opportunity, and I found that just to be unacceptable. You know, today I'm 63 years old, and I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren and a great-granddaughter. And I found that there are African-American transgender women in Baltimore who die younger than my children. I have a 40-year-old daughter, and that is unacceptable. And so I can't explain it, I don't want to explain it, and I don't try to explain it. But there's something that burns in me that just says that there's something wrong with that picture, and it needs to change. And so, in the end, you can call that and you can describe it and you can explain it whatever way you want, but it's been inside of me for as long as I can remember. When something is wrong, we just need to make it right. And so that's what it is for me. Thank you.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow up with that, to that. So thanks again for coming out, for having me be a part of this fantastic conversation. I'm really excited about this. So as you can tell, I am Muslim, and I am visibly Muslim, visibly American Muslim, and I have been visibly other since about 10 years old, when my mom made a bet with me that I couldn't wear the headscarf like my best friend at the time. And as a 10-year-old who is irate at the possibility of my mom winning, I put it on. And after that, you know, really became a part of my identity and a part of my feminism. This ability to choose to be who I was, regardless of how the world saw me, which was a fun fact, or a fun reality for me, because, you know, my parents always had us, we were moved around a lot, and we lived in white suburbia, you know, the utopic suburbia, right? And I'm the oldest of 8. My youngest sister is 6 years old. And so I came of age at 9/11, basically, you know. It was around the same time I put on my headscarf. I still vividly remember my mom taking me by the shoulders and saying, from this day forth, you know, you're an ambassador for the religion, how many billions of people, you're an ambassador for them, and people are gonna watch everything you do and say. And so that was a weight that I carried very seriously moving forward. And in the different instances of harassment, you know, and a lot of people will say, well, Islamophobia is a modern concept, or it really doesn't happen. Speaking as someone who just recently I just recently bought pepper spray because I was like, oh, okay, I might die like after the election, but maybe. But you know, as someone who has been, followed by like boys on bikes as I'm trying to go to the library, shot at with BB guns, you know, my siblings stalked, harassed on every form of public transportation possible. The reality is that American Muslims have dealt with Islamophobia since day one, whether they are immigrants or whether they were here, not as immigrants according to Ben Carson, but here from the start of this nation's formation. Don't know if you guys read the news yesterday, but you know, this reality of being visibly other led to my understanding that the world was something that I had the ability to really do something about, and if I ever second guessed that, you know, like the world would throw it back in my face. And so I really realized that I was other when I was going to school at Wellesley, which is Hillary's alma mater. And so Wellesley is considered the bastion of liberalism and feminism and all of that fun stuff. And senior year of school, I was actually, I had applied for a a research trip down to, I think it was like North Carolina, and we were gonna go there and go to schools and check out like how the classrooms worked. And I was an education studies minor, I regret that, but I had applied and I got in, and the professor hadn't met me yet. And there's a thing at Wellesley, I don't know if you guys have it here, it's a student directory, right? And so you can like look up anyone's name. This was like pre-fully Facebook, this is 2010 or something. But like you could look up someone's name and their photo would show up. And she looked up my name. And she saw that I had a headscarf. And she called the principal down south and said, listen, one of the students on my trip is coming down and she wears a headscarf. And I'd love to say that that this professor stood up for me, but in actuality, she asked me to come to her office, and I came, and I was like, okay, cool, like maybe this is like a retroactive interview. Like I already got the spot. Maybe she just wants to talk about, details of the trip, because I'm all about trips. And she sat me down, and she was like, listen, the principal is not comfortable with your headscarf. He's not comfortable with what students will say to their parents and what parents will say to the school. And she went on and on about how, they've always been accepting of differences and how students of every background have gone down there, but they never had a girl, like a woman with a headscarf go down there. And then we went through some potential solutions. The most popular one for her was, why don't you take it off? That was great. And so, I sat there and before this, I had been the major overachiever because my parents said psychology, which was my major, will not take you anywhere in life. So I had done like extensive research at Wellesley and MIT and Tufts, and now here there's this professor who is telling me that my headscarf is the barrier between me and potentially getting more research experience under my belt. And so she bribed me with a research internship with her that was paid and said I couldn't attend the program because, of course, I'm like, fuck no, I'm not going to take off my headscarf. I already have to deal with putting it on in the morning and, like, looking fabulous, and now you want me to take it off? Like, no. I'm kidding. It's not that. Do you look hot in that? Yes, I do. So I went, and I remember I spoke to an Asian American friend, and she said, this was the moment I realized what allyship looked like, and I know we're going to touch on that later. She said, just get over it, move on. And then I went and spoke with my blue-eyed, blonde-haired Polish friend who was an immigrant. She's a first gen as well as I am. And she was so pissed. She was like, are you serious? Like, we need to do something about this. And coupled that with a phone call to my mom, who started screaming about suing the college, I decided to call the president of the college. And of course, Wellesley, well, I'm airing a lot of dirty laundry, but our president at the time wasn't really willing to meet with students unless you had like an appointment 3 months in advance, and I needed to fix it right away. So I called, and I felt really bad, but I left a voicemail, like a message with the student who picked up the phone that basically boiled down to, can you just put in the course catalog next year for this course that students with headscarves need not apply? And she's like, I felt so bad for her. But the next morning, I woke up to so many deans and folks just being like, let's fix this. We're going to fix this. You're going to go down to this trip. You're going to do this, whatever. And, it got worked out. The professor never understood why it was an issue that she asked me to take it off, even throughout the entire trip. And it was in that moment, and it was in that trip that I realized, that I have to keep proving myself as a good Muslim woman, right? And keep dealing with these BS stereotypes that, I love it when people are like, let's break stereotypes. And I'm like, you are imposing stereotypes on me. I'm not breaking anything. Like, if I tell you this is who I am, you deal with it, right? And so post-college, I worked at Princeton. I looked at how storytelling and rhetoric affects our memories, and that's when the Boston bombing happened. And as someone who feels deeply responsible for the future of my siblings and those that are like them, so American Muslim children. I decided to move down to DC. I thought I was going to go into public policy and become a social justice activist and rah-rah and all that fun stuff, and ended up pitching to the Huffington Post about an issue that was happening at the time. This was 2013, so the Femin protests were happening, and most people don't know what Femin is unless I tell them that they're the topless blonde women that like scribble things on their boobs and like try to liberate the world. And so in 2013, they were trying to liberate me from my headscarf and like all other Muslim women from their headscarves. And the only opportunities that were being given for the issue to be talked about from media outlets was to Femin. Like nobody actually gave a shit and asked Muslim women, hey, can you tell us like what your perspective is? So I was on Facebook at like 3 a.m., which I'm sure you all understand, and I was scrolling through Ariana Huffington's Facebook post, and sometimes in that age, she would put her email in the comments, and so I screenshotted it. And I had written a Facebook status that was like, this is gonna be amazing, hashtag activism, you know, I'm doing something really big, gonna get like 50 likes on this is huge, and then I was like, you know, let me just take a chance and pitch the story to Ariana. And she responded, and she was like, go for it. And after peeing my pants a little bit, I wrote my first ever article, and I thought, okay, my parents and my friends are gonna see this. It was a response piece to the Femin protests, where I talked about that I don't need your saving, and that Muslim women don't need your saving. And if they need saving, they can do it themselves, because we're like badass, just generally speaking. And so it went viral, and I got thousands of death threats and hate comments, and ended up debating Ina Shevchenko, who is the founder of Femin, who actually in the middle of the debate, again, like I keep having a track record of white women doing this, told me to take off my headscarf if I wanted to keep talking to her. And that was the turning point for me. That was the moment that I went into media, because the Huffington Post producers were saying, okay, Laila, like, you have a few seconds to answer this, but we want to talk about the Boston bombing. So, you know, and then I said, listen, this is exactly the issue that happens time and again. You guys are all about amplifying Muslim women's voices, but when you have one right in front of you, in your space, you give her like a millisecond to respond. And that was like my proudest moment on video in 2013. But yeah, so I don't do typical, like what people call typical social justice activism, which is, you know, going out and marching and, you know, posting protest selfies. And I'm not pooping on the protest selfies. I am, like, kind of actually, I'm pooping on protest selfies. Go protest. But what I realized and what my research showed is that the reason that we have someone like Trump in office right now, regardless of whether or not you voted or who you voted for, is because he used rhetoric and stories to illustrate his points. And he persuaded people to make decisions that they wouldn't have even considered a year or two before, simply by using stories. And what you see now on a day-to-day basis is that social media and media have become one, and that media quite literally is shifting the future of policy, politics, culture, right? And it's interwoven. And so I decided, okay, so my plan is to take over the world, right? And so I'm gonna use media to get me there and to get all of the other women that I want to amplify there. And decided to marry my research with, you know, an unconventional form of activism, which is kind of, I call it capitalist activism, where you gain power and money. So there's a, sorry, I know I'm going on a tangent, but there's a trifecta, right? If you want to be successful according to the powers that be in life, you need money, power, or people. Like, wait, money, people, or votes, that's power, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go for money and people, and then I'm gonna get to that point where right now only white men are, because in media, 88% of newsrooms are men, 8 to 27% in a newsroom is diverse. How many women are there? only 8% of media outlets are actually run by or owned by women, including your favorites like Cosmo and Teen Vogue. They're not usually owned by women. And so what that does is it silences voices like mine, like many women, or those who identify as women in the audience here today, and you can't really create substantial change in the online and then in-person landscape without shifting media. And so my purpose is really to, change, I guess, like, democratize access to voices that we don't hear from otherwise, and do it without being, and do it while being mainstream. Because if BuzzFeed is such a powerhouse, why can't diverse millennial women be a powerhouse and like get shit done too? So that's my story.
So, thank you. It's clear that your encounters with oppression and racism and discrimination have shaped your involvement and your investment in social activism. And so I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how your millennial status has helped shape your approaches to activism. I know, Monica, perhaps if you'll talk a little bit about your involvement with millennials, but if we can sort of focus on millennial status and activism.
Oh, well, I'll go first. So obviously I'm not a millennial, but my granddaughters are. And so my granddaughters are also multiracial, and so I'm the person that they come and talk to because I have some history, and I guess they seem to think that I know everything in that area. And what has happened recently is they've encountered discrimination not only because of race, but because of gender. Gender and sexuality, and so a lot of things seem to get mixed together. I came out to my father about 15 years ago. This is something that I ran away from for a long time. My oldest granddaughter is 22, she'll be 23 a little bit later in this year, and my youngest granddaughter is 18. And so they basically only know me as Monica. And so for them, this is not really, and one of the things I've noticed about millennials, and so this is what I'm getting at with this, they're not as uptight, let's say, about gender and racial kinds of things in general, taken as a whole. But what happens is in other communities that they run into, and other communities that they meet, they've run into a lot of resistance. And so, especially since the election, there have been a lot of shifts. And so they worry about me and I worry about them. And so my grandchildren wonder why I don't carry mace, or wonder why I don't carry a knife, and I wonder why they don't carry a knife. Because one of the things that's happened in Baltimore is there's an increase in racial bullying. You know, and whereas there was a time when it felt like tensions had gotten better, it's never been post-racial. That's a myth. And so I have to speak from experience. I know a lot of people here maybe don't have children, but maybe there are people here who plan to have children. And so I am speaking to millennials because you're probably at an age where you're not necessarily thinking about a family, but going forward, you will at some point, some of you think about families. And families aren't gender specific, families aren't specific to sexualities. Families aren't specific to identities. You know, families are how we make them. Families are who we love and how we love each other. You know, and so when you think about who you love and who you want to influence with your life and with your life experience, those are the people that you worry about on a daily basis. And so right now, those are my grandchildren. You know, and I worry about the world that they're going to be in. You know, when I hear the craziness that I heard out of Ben Carson, you know, honestly. So I grew up at a time when Ben Carson was considered a hero in the black community because he was a brilliant surgeon, you know, and there were books, and so they were the things that we read in school. Only to find myself in a place now where I'm like, you know, let me switch, because I switch gears a lot. I went to the Women's March, and my favorite sign there was, I can't believe I have to do this shit all over again. And that's how I feel. I can't believe I have to do this all over again. No, because I'm at an age now where I thought that I would be doing more advising.
So we're gonna just move because we only have about 15 minutes. So I'm gonna
Okay.
Oh,
Okay, so let me close my point. So my point is this. Millennials are gonna have to carry the torch in a time where I thought that millennials would enjoy the benefit of the work of elders. So you're gonna have to strap up and just get to work. And so see race for what it is, for the reality of what it is, and realize that this country was never built for minorities. It was never built for women. And just take it from there, you know, and not get consumed by anger, but realize the reality of it and what has to be done from there. You know, and so I would like to elaborate a little more, but we don't really have the time.
I can also respond to that a little bit. I think for millennials, we have to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of so many, like Monica, who have done this work. And I think that's exactly what happened at Mizzou, what fueled the students so much, because we were looking at demands and all this kind of stuff, and the you know, Gaines versus Canada was, you know, a case about Lloyd Gaines trying to get into the University of Missouri Law School, Lucille Bluford, who was denied entrance into our journalism school because she was a black woman. Black kids weren't admitted until 1950, and the first black graduate graduated in 3 years because the environment was so hostile for him to learn. He studied as hard as he could, got straight A's so that he could get out of the university. I think understanding the systems of oppression that exist and doing that as millennials and recognizing that we are so privileged because we stand on the shoulders of many who did this work, but more importantly, we have the opportunity, many of us have the opportunities to be in these educational institutions where we can learn about our past and use it as fuel to teach us how to create a more equitable future for all of us. And honestly, I think that was the role of millennials, especially in the student movement at Mizzou. And I remember the Facebook post that I wrote that detailed my own experiences with racism and our campus issues with transphobia and homophobia and whatever these issues may be. I didn't expect it to go viral because for many, this was so many of our realities. We didn't think it was a story. It went viral, number one, not because of the issues that were presented, but because of the privilege behind the office that I held as student body president. Never before had somebody else used a platform like this, at least in the student space that they were talking about, to raise awareness for these issues. And that's why it was a story. So we have to be able to recognize the privilege that we have and understand that the privilege is used, that your privilege is more of a responsibility to do this work in these spaces. And I think that is just so important. And those moments when we thought we were alone at Mizzou, the solidarity that came in nationwide and and international from students from the Fees Must Fall movement in South Africa or students in Turkey and Chile, it showed us that we weren't alone. And the media tried to paint Mizzou as a hotbed of racial harassment because that's what sold papers. But Mizzou is a hotbed of racial harassment because America is a hotbed of racial harassment. It's just important, now more than ever, that we realize this, to figure out what is there next to do. And I think the millennials, now more than ever, like Monica said, we have to hold this torch in this. Those of us who have the privilege of being at elite universities and sitting in classrooms all day to be able to study all of our different amazing disciplines, we have to recognize that that privilege is even more of a responsibility to educate the world on all of these issues. And I'm going to end on one note so we can get to everybody else too. I don't want to be talking too much. But I remember our system president, our interim system president, he was an activist at his time at Mizzou. He said that we focus so much on other things in society at universities. We focus so much on prioritizing different areas of research, which are extremely important. But I remember him saying something that stuck with me. He said racism and this idea of exclusion is one of the most viral and biggest diseases that we have in our nation. What if we treated universities like hospitals to cure racism? What if we use our universities, our fancy institutions, and our fancy research monies to go towards understanding and studying the very thing that this country was built on, so that we can understand how to fight it and move forward as an equitable society? And for many days, I think that it's sometimes you just get you're like, oh, this is too much, it's not possible. But I think for us coming together, millennials being in the youth and having all of this courage and all of this support and badassery or whatever you want to call it, it's on us now more than ever to be able to make these societal changes. Because I remember the quote that kind of follows the work that I try to do on a daily basis is from Barack Obama at his 2008 speech. And he said, change will not come if we wait around for somebody else to do it, in essence. But we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. And I used to sit around and I'm like, somebody got to come along and help us with all these societal issues. Where's the next Dr. Martin Luther King or somebody? Then I looked around and I looked in the mirror. It's us.
Yes.
We have to do this work.
Yes.
And just to add one more thing, that work looks differently. It's not always marching. Many times it's in the boardrooms. Many times it's for the people who are studying medicine here, like doing the research and all that kind of stuff to save lives and having a person of color's name attached to it to give us more humanity. All of that kind of stuff is activism. So I think if we can get in this mindset that not every one of us can do everything, but all of us in this room can do something. And part of your something is just by being in this room today.
Laila, thank you very much. We had a conversation the other day, and you were talking about the safety pin movement, and when we were talking about the responsibility of millennials. I don't know if you'd like to pick up there.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, wait, let me just write this down, because as you guys know, I ramble. The safety pin movement rant that I had? Okay. And the millennial thing?
Yes, and the millennials.
Okay. All right, so how many of you heard about the safety pin movement after the inauguration?
Oh, yes, I have one on my jacket.
Oh, fabulous. Well, at least you live it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so how many of you don't have to raise your hands for this, how many of you in wearing that safety pin or in choosing to get with the movement in the last few months have witnessed a moment of harassment or microaggression or just general bullshittery and done what your safety pin was supposed to do? Don't raise your hands. You can inside you answer it, because it's more of a depressing answer. So here's the fun thing is, as someone who's harassed like on a weekly, daily, whatever basis, I'm like a magnet. It's pretty fun. I have never, in the last 2 months, in my entire life, never had anyone de-escalate or say anything to the person either harassing me or to me until after the incident happened and after the harasser has left. And so my specific peeve with the safety pin movement was that it started out really adorable and well-meaning. I love words. So it started out really well-meaning, well-intentioned. Then Vogue started selling $1,000 safety pins that you could wear with your outfits. And it became commodified into a sort of put it on your clothing and now you don't need to do any of the responsibilities attached, because if a marginalized person sees that safety pin, they know they're safe, which to me is a load of crap. I'm just saying it because I am not going to, if someone is screaming at me about that they're going to kill me or that I'm killing people or whatever, which I recently got by a man biking past me at 9 p.m. on the street that I walk back every single day. So I actually was terrified. There was an enormous group of tourists right next to me. They didn't say shit, nothing. And there were at least 20 people there. And so this man is biking by saying things. So my specific issue is that what I saw was there were a lot of millennials who decided that this safety pin was their entryway into the world of activism, that they were suddenly allies because they were wearing this pin. And here's a little secret. That is simply, I have a safety pin on my coat for my headscarf, okay? Like, it's like always there. Like, I don't, it is not to me, if you have a safety pin, I'll ask you, because if I need to fix my headscarf, like, I can fix it now. But you cannot put that on and expect for the world to become a better place, because it's not. It's becoming worse. I mean, anti-Semitism is on the rise right now, which blows my mind. But, like, allyship and activism, in whatever form it is, comes from standing up in those uncomfortable conversations where you see someone being harassed, or if you are, I'm half white, so I say white all the time, but if you are a white person in a group of white friends or family members and they're making racial comments or they are making phobic comments of any nature, and you're proud of your little safety pin that you have on your coat or on your shirt, that activism is in that very moment, in that uncomfortable situation where you stand up and you're like, hey, yeah, guys, I don't really think that it's necessary for us to be racist AF. I think we should probably talk about the systemic racism that has brought us to this point. That's when I will actually consider you an ally. If I see you with a safety pin, like, I will just give you a tiny clap and a little violin play, because to me, that's just a fashion statement. It's not activism. That was my rant to you.
Well, just to add on a little bit with the safety pin thing, that's something I've thought about, but not on the same level as you. But some of my relatives have been like, look, I have a safety pin, and like really excited. And it's at first I'm like, did you like go to the dry cleaners and like they put this on and you forgot to take it off? But it's like they think they're doing a big thing. But one of the things that's kind of been frustrating to me a little bit about the safety pin, as well intentioned as it is that it's like a covert symbol that says that you're going to like be standing up for people who are very visible and like targets for harassment. So it's kind of interesting to me, and I think that's like also a problem that we have like as millennials growing up in like a post-racial society, that that actually like talking explicitly about race and engaging explicitly and not as like some covert symbol seems to be more difficult. Because we're supposed to be progressed past that. So.
Okay. Thank you. We have time for one more question before we open it up to the audience to ask questions. And I wanted you all to briefly talk a little bit about the fact that many activist groups seem to have a specific focus on, say, immigration, Black Lives Matter, challenging sexism, homophobism, Islamophobia. And my question to you is, what recommendations do you have that would help different groups align along their shared concerns around social justice?
So I can just briefly comment on this. I actually pulled up a quote because I keep forgetting the quote, but the quote is, and the thing that I think about a lot when it comes to social activist movements and groups, since in the American Muslim community, we've got a group for every single little problem, is that this quote is by Will Durant, who was a historian who passed away. The political machine triumphs because it is a united minority acting against a divided majority. And so that resonates now more than ever before, post-election, post-inauguration, in which we see, and social media and the news have served to exacerbate this to the extent where we are more comfortable siloed off into spaces with people that we are familiar with, people that look like us, people that talk like us or eat like us. And we are really uncomfortable broaching the different gaps between groups. And if you think about your circle of closest friends, I'm not talking about friends, right? I'm talking about the best friends that you hang out with, you feel most comfortable with. They usually look like you or have the same set of values as you. And that goes to the social movements as a whole. The one moment that most specifically stood out to me post-inauguration was the mobilization around this universal issue of the Muslim ban, which is back, by the way, in case you guys didn't get the news. It just isn't as covered. But it isn't as covered now ingeniously because Trump came out with a slew of policies and new directives that actually attacked multiple groups, multiple minority communities, sexuality, gender, like every single flipping group was attacked along with the Muslim ban, right? He didn't do that cute tactic the first time, and that's why we saw so much mobilization around one issue that was universally felt, right? And so understand that the forces above, but they're not really. I can tell you this. I worked at the DHS for a task force, and they're not that qualified, to be frank. The reality is that now more than ever is the time to reach out. If you're part of a social group, you can't disappear into your silos. If that means showing up for a protest, if as an American Muslim, if I showed up for a protest and got involved with actions against ICE and against the deportations, that will have more impact if I also couple it along with my sharing any funding that my group has, resources, press contacts, that sort of thing. So it's not just showing up for the protest, it's also sharing our resources. That's where you're really going to get impact, and that's where you're going to build alliances that will last past a simple issue. Because that's, getting media coverage, I will note, media coverage is the best way, as we've seen, to piss off the president and make him do some crazier things. So this is the time to really do that.
I would add that, that was great, by the way. This is something that I grapple with a lot because I remember when everything was going on at Mizzou, I was interviewing with a radio station in St. Louis, and they had asked me, so what do you think is going to happen now? Like, does our movement even matter? Now people are focused on these gender-neutral restrooms with the LGBTQ community and everything. What about for black people? Like, what is being done? And I'm like, first of all, you haven't really done any research on me, have you? Number one. Number two, it's like, we have to, oh, that was loud. We have to be able to acknowledge the privilege that exists within our own communities. And I think that that is so important. And one of the issues that we had at Mizzou was just that. There were black men, cisgender straight black men who wanted to be the face of the movement while the black women were doing the work and have always been doing the work and have always been leading the marches and the protests and the sit-ins and all that kind of stuff since the very beginning. We have to be able to have a conversation about problematic masculinity. We have to be able to have a conversation about the homophobia, the transphobia within our communities. And I think that is, to me, I think that is so important for us to be able to move forward. In addition to that, we have to acknowledge that there is a privilege that exists just by being able to sit in this space right here. To be able to have access to higher education is something that is so important. It separates you. And for me, I think about it because I used to come home from college and, you know, I would be having these conversations with my friends about every single thing that I had learned being involved with the social justice community at Mizzou. I'm giving them a breakdown of systemic oppression and talking about problematic masculinity and homophobia and helping them understand the concept of intersectionality. That's all great, but we have to recognize that there is privilege in that. That this language, a lot of times, we get so focused on the language a lot of times that we don't get focused on the action. And we don't focus on making sure that we can break it down in ways that we can help our people understand what is truly happening. And I think that's kind of what have happened like in our nation, like even looking at the Democratic Party, I think there's a lot of people who are just pissed off about this whole PC culture and all this other kind of stuff. And at first I was like, y'all are horrible, but then I really start to try to, one thing that helps for me is to really try to take the time to understand a different perspective. And I realized we have a lot of fancy words. And one of my friends, who happens to be undocumented, we had a conversation of the usage of the term Latinx. And, you know, he attends Hampshire College, you know, which is a private university. And he was saying, you know, when I'm down in Georgia doing work on the field, like with my people, they don't know what Latinx is. We're still trying to learn English. We're trying to get our papers. And it's not to say that the language doesn't matter. The language is extremely important, don't get me wrong. But we have to make sure that we can understand that there are barriers that already exist within our own communities. And we have to be willing to break those down as well if we're gonna have an intersectional movement that, you know, that uplifts and elevates people regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their gender expression, gender identity, whatever it may be. We have to be knowledgeable on the issues. And when we get into these spaces, it's important that we're able to continue to have conversations with those who have the privilege to be able to make a difference, to be able to make a change. Because I remember, I was just hearing, I was like, how can I take down white supremacy? White supremacy was built by white people. So white people gotta be the ones to break that system down. And I think, thank you. And I think there's more of a responsibility. And now more than ever, like we hear, well, it's time to do the work, it's time to do the work. People have been doing the work. For some people, getting up and rolling out of their bed every day, just occupying the identity that they occupy because their identity is so politicized, just walking down the street is political. So the people with the privilege and the power to say something and do something have to do that. And it starts sometimes by making sure that when we have conversations like this, and I remember I used to lead conversations like this at Mizzou all the time, that we're not preaching to the choir all the time. I would take my conversations to sorority houses and fraternity houses at Mizzou. And I would have blonde hair and blue-eyed people looking at me, and I would understand. And I would say, you know what? Yeah, this may not be your direct fault, but you play a role in it. Not all of us has to do everything, but every last one of you can do something, and you all have more of a responsibility to do something about it, because when you say Black Lives Matter, it means something. When I say Black Lives Matter, it's more of me expressing that my humanity should matter. And it sucks that something like that is so political, but it's political because we are politicized as a people. And the people who created the politics, the people who lead the politics, have to understand that and have to know that we all have a role in making this better. And yeah, the conversations are gonna be uncomfortable, but nobody's gonna grow until we're all uncomfortable. And on the conversation of intersectionality, I think Maya Angelou said that none of us are liberated until the most oppressed of us are free. Until all of us are free. So if we're not working to break down those barriers that exist within our communities and truly have real conversations, because I think the problem is too, is when we stop talking. Like when you say, oh, well, that person's problematic, so I can't say nothing to them. Yeah, part of it may be self-care, and I get that. Because sometimes, you know, some people just be too much, like a lot. Like my Uber driver today, like I had just seen Moonlight, I was already emotional, and I was on my way here, and he was talking about, well, you know, Trump is not as bad, but that's when, in a moment, I had to shut down. That's just one situation, because I just wasn't in the mood for it right then. But any other time, it would have been a conversation. And so don't lose those moments to have a conversation. Because I think that when we don't talk, we don't get anything moving forward. And I think as a nation, we're not talking. It's the language sometimes that separates us. We don't want to be saying the wrong thing. But if you're coming from a place of good intent, then say it. And say that you're coming from a place of good intent. Because I remember hearing about, like, there was so much of a conversation about safe spaces on college campuses. I'm like, if anything, the safe spaces are for the people who are in the privileged positions to be able to learn, to be able to come in and have a place where every single thing that they're saying is coming from a place in good intent for the purpose of learning. And if we're not promoting learning at institutions of higher learning on these issues, then what are we really doing? If we can't teach people how to live in a society that embraces and accepts all people just for being who they are, then what are we doing in these fancy higher ed institutions? So I think that's just part of it. I think that on that note of looping in the intersectionality, it's just important for us to realize the many ways in which we're privileged. Because when we start pointing fingers and calling people privileged, I notice that they shut down real quickly. So now many times I start off a conversation. If I know I'm gonna like talk about privilege and white privilege, I'll talk about my privileges. I was like, you know, I might have grown up and been homeless and all that kind of stuff, but at the same time, somebody thought enough of me to help me get to college. I had access to higher education. I'm a man. You know, these are things that I necessarily couldn't control, but they happened to me. And those are privileges. My privileges matter too. And when I speak about them, it helps people understand that because we have these privileges, we have more of a responsibility to speak out on these issues. More importantly, to learn about the issues before we speak, because sometimes that's how people really get us messed up, when you don't take the time to learn and then you want to talk. But be educated on the issues, speak on them, act on them, and you can help create a better society for us all. And it's not all cut and dry, but that's just some of my thoughts on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have much time left, and so with the time that we have remaining, we'd like to open it up to questions. So if you have a question or a comment, if you could come to the microphone on either side. And as you're framing your question, if you would frame it as a question and make it brief so that as many panelists as possible can answer.
Not so much.
Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
go for it.
Okay, I'll just speak up. First of all, thank you. This has been a privilege to be here tonight.
There we go.
There we
I heard the term allyship, and one of the things I was thinking about as you all spoke is, do we connect to community of activism if we all have some sense of the other in us? So on the one hand, we have a sense of privilege, but do we need to to connect to that space of other within us and the sense that we are outsiders for us to join in activism?
In one sense, nobody's an outsider because we're all in this together. So, you know, you may be white and I'm black, and so we can't have the same experience. That doesn't make you an outsider to my experience. You know, so we may share in that experience a different way, but don't think of yourself as an outsider. For example, in my community, you know, when we look at it on a local level, all kinds of things go on in Washington, but long before Freddie Gray, there were black trans women being murdered in Baltimore and all over the country. And if you go to #SayHerName, you'll find that there were black women being murdered by cops all over this country. Okay, so that doesn't make you an outsider. That just means that that's not your experience. So when you become more than an observer, then you're part of the experience as an ally. So what happens is everybody gets to be a part of the experience. I'd rather you be a participant in my experience by finding some way to get involved. You know, sometimes what happens is the person who's an ally participates in a way that we don't need to participate. I've been part of so many programs that were run by cis allies for transgender people. And then we say, wait a minute, we don't need you to run something for us. We don't need you to manage a program for black people, we need you to partner with us. And so don't think of yourself as an outsider. Just think of yourself as a participant. And so that's my take on that.
Just one other thing in terms of thinking about intersectionality as like a real analytical tool is also being in a privileged position or being an ally, you still have some sense of the structure of the different power relationships in organizing, and so that's something that, I mean, you spoke to how to capitalize on, or how to use your privilege effectively, but I think everyone's also in it in that they can work on thinking what is the power structure and how is it working and how do we build relationships to address it.
Hi, I appreciate the panelists on the left, or my left, bringing up the issue of class and how class is related to political correctness. I'm from a working class family, first generation college student, so part of the work for me is going home and having conversations with my parents who don't, educating them about things and having difficult conversations, not just with them, but with other people as well. And I was curious for the other panelists if you could speak to difficult conversations and bridging the gap, you know, talking to people who aren't as familiar with the language and what those experiences have been like for you.
So I guess I can take this one. So as someone who comes from a faith community and actively considers it part of my identity, and has been involved in a lot of efforts within the American Muslim community, there are a lot of conversations that have had to arise throughout the years with regards to other communities that are being attacked or demonized. For example, I'm airing the dirty laundry. Sorry, parents. So within, there are high rates of homophobic sentiments that can arise within more conservative American Muslim spaces, right? And these sorts of sentiments are ones that are unconsciously picked up. And it wasn't until I went to college and came face to face with the reality that some of my closest friends were queer that I began to feel that deep level of discomfort when I would go back to my community and just hear, you know, a word tossed around that nobody else was thinking twice about, but that had deep-seated issues, right? So it's really, for me, I don't approach conversations around, I don't approach uncomfortable conversations attempting to use language that might be used in more privileged communities or more academically focused papers. My biggest crutch when I was working within academic spaces was the fact that I always tried to talk like a normal person as opposed to, you know, using larger terminology. And so really just understanding, I think the biggest lessons that I took away from these conversations that eventually had enough of an impact that people changed their minds around how they approached queer communities, to the point where, you know, even though everyone on social media likes to say that, like every troll likes to say that, you know, Muslim communities stone, you know, the gay community, which isn't true. When the Florida nightclub shooting happened, within the Boston community, which is where I'm from, there were actual educated conversations about actions that could be taken within conservative Muslim spaces, right? So conservative, liberal, progressive, like all of these are BS terms when it comes to being Muslim, I'm just gonna say that. But within practicing Muslim spaces about what they could do to ensure that those who felt out, that felt unwelcome within religious spaces and that considered themselves as queer could be a part of those larger community spaces. And that comes from really having uncomfortable conversations and understanding that where you're coming from, and I'm sure that you deal with this, going home and but listening to where your parents are coming from, and also, thinking back to how you grew up, that these are realities that have never been questioned before. And so instead of coming in and being like having a blowtorch and just being like, let me just burn this whole building down, like you all have to listen to me, having individualistic conversations where you bring it down to someone's reality, right? What if your kid was like this, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the conversations that will last longer than speeches that really come from a place of hoity-toity privilege, right? And I'm privileged too, right? In so many ways, it's really uncomfortable to think about them. But really, like, those conversations take a long time. I think that's another thing, is like it takes time. And you can't expect a Facebook status to change everything. You have to expect that you're going to sometimes walk away from conversations crying or second-guessing your relationship with that other human being. But those are the conversations that are exactly what need to happen if we want to be able to move forward and out of our silos.
Yes. I'm a person of faith. One of the best quotes that I've heard probably in my lifetime comes from a man named Ernest Holmes. And it says, in order to have a better world, I have to be a better person in this world. And so I have a lot of difficult questions when it comes to people in and out of faith communities. Because first of all, they don't believe that a transgender person can be a person of faith. And so a lot of conversations start with, well, so how can God recognize you? And so when I'm in a conversation like that, and I have to answer people the same way God recognizes you, unconditionally. And so it leads to a lot of difficult conversations, and some of those started in my own family as well, and some of those continue to go on in my family. Like I said, I came out to my father 15 years ago. I was 48. So there was a long period of rejection. And so with all of these conversations, whenever you're in a community that's othered, because we're talking about othered communities, whenever you're in a community that's othered, that means people think that we're normal and you're the other. So there's something intrinsically wrong with us. And so it's not my job to convince somebody that there's not something intrinsically wrong with me. Because I've tried that approach. That approach is futile. But it is my job to let people know that in any way that you measure it, that I breathe the same air as you, I bleed the same as you, I'm a human just as you are. And so I don't need to prove anything to you. And so my belief is in faith just as yours is, and we don't need to argue about it. And so you notice I also talked a lot about my grandchildren. My daughter is kind of wavering, and I said I had 2 children. I also have a son who has a lot of difficulty. So what I'm saying is it's something that is person to person, but difficult conversations aren't something that we can avoid and hope to make progress if we're going to really make this a better world. And so I don't avoid difficult conversations. I have them. Some of them are awful. Some of them are with people who are, I had one yesterday with someone who was extremely disrespectful. But what I know is if this is going to be a better world, I have to keep being a better person. And so that means sometimes I have to go back and talk to my father. Sometimes I have to find a corner and quiet myself. And then sometimes they need a verbal slap. Honestly. But in any situation, I have to make sure that my motive is okay. And at the end of the day, I can lay my head down and be okay. Because, we live in a time right now that I was hoping I would never see again. And in order for it to get better, like I said earlier, we have to keep fighting. But I will leave you with this. Decide what you're fighting for so that you don't find yourself just fighting against. Because if you win a battle and all you're doing is fighting against, when the battle's over, you're going to be just left, with nothing. Mm-hmm. So find what you're fighting for.
We have time for one more question.
Hello. So my name's Mohammed. I grew up in a very poor Muslim mixed family, which was, fun. So my question morally is, you guys went over socioeconomic status for a little bit. Something I do a lot more studying on is classism. So I guess my question really is, how do you believe classism interacts with racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and all the like?
Wow. So I grew up in inner city Baltimore, 22nd and Greenmount for people that are from here. And so some people automatically thought that I was lower class. And then when I speak, people think that, well, you must have grown up in the county, you're bougie. So an element of classism is a construct. It just is. Because people, even though they tell you don't judge a book by its cover, people do. Mm-hmm. So an element of it is something that people like to paste on me. But then an element of it is what I choose to accept. It's an agreement. And then an element of it is privilege, because obviously I leverage it. Right? You leverage it and an element of it. But it is an ism and it is a schism. The thing about it is there's a part that's totally out of our control, and it gains us access and it limits access. And it's something that we have to own. I don't think it's something that ever goes away. It's something that's in the social construct of all of us. But it's something that we have to own, and we have to be honest about it. For me, I have to be aware of it and how it's being used against me and how I use it. Yeah. Every day, all the time.
Oh, sorry. Next, go on. So, I don't know where you went. Okay. Awesome. So, yeah, you just kept walking, and I was just like, hey, bye. So, I too am a fob, and fresh off the boat. So I came to the U.S. when I was 5, and grew up, with a lot of siblings and parents who came here for the American dream. We actually moved from Japan, not from Syria, which is where most people think I came from. But the point is that I spent a significant part of my life dealing with or living through lower socioeconomic conditions, in that we would go out and get food stamps. And so I still vividly remember the experience of being in the office and having to have all of my siblings behave, because my mom's in there talking to the worker for a million hours. And now, as things have, when I got to college, I would be very careful about picking out outfits that were from the discount section at Forever 21, but people started thinking that I came from some wealthy Emirati family, right? And so it's this weird discomfort, but in which, like you said, it never leaves you. My family is now doing better, but it makes me deeply uncomfortable. This is me being straight up. It makes me deeply uncomfortable to visit their home, or my home, my family home, because of the privilege that my siblings are now able to grow up in, the lower 4. But the reality is, I personally have used my experiences as growing up with someone who's dealt with a lower socioeconomic, who was in a lower socioeconomic class, to fuel my empathy and my understanding of how different groups, whether they intersect with my identity or intersect with the identities of those around me, I allow that to be of use when I approach those conversations and when I approach initiatives. Because you can let it, and this is again privileged of me to say, but the summer after college, I didn't have a job. I worked at Staples, right? And I got to see point blank students that went to my school who deliberately did not recognize me because I had the red Staples shirt on, and they had fancy jobs at Harvard. And I had to be like humble day in and day out, checking out their things. And so it's really this understanding that you can use it as you move forward in life, because, I mean, you're at this school, so you're obviously on a different track than those that are still in positions where you were, right? Use that knowledge and your impending privilege in the years to come to help be a constructive ally for those that are, you know, still in those situations. And again, like, that's coming from a person with privilege now, but like, my parents don't give me money. I'm just gonna say that. Like, I have to earn all of it on my own. So I had to earn my own citizenship. It was flipping annoying. Like, it took me 2 extra years to get it because I was poor. So yeah, so I guess that's my advice.
I think that was a really great question, and really great answers too. But I think that, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I honestly think that socioeconomic status and all that kind of stuff, classism, I think it's really one of the biggest things that separates us, like beyond race, beyond whatever it may be, because it affects so much of our life experience. But it's so stigmatized to talk about. Like, you don't ask people how much money they got in their pocket, or if they grew up rich or poor, and there's different ways that people go about doing it. Oh, what school did you go to? Or did you go to school? Oh, you didn't go. You know, it's those little microaggression things that we don't even take time to recognize because we're too busy focused on, you know, race, class, gender, all that kind of stuff, which is important. But we have to be able to have a conversation about that, because it means the world. Even when I was talking about, like, everything that happens with this new administration coming in, your socioeconomic status, that kind of privilege, how much money you have, is going to separate you from the effects of this administration. So if you have all the money in the bank, you know, and laws are coming down against certain things or whatever it may be, or healthcare, so if you're, you know, you don't have to worry about healthcare or something like that, and, you know, because you have money in the bank, that's going to affect your quality of life. And it really doesn't matter, you know, your race does play a big role into it. It does. Because there's systemic oppression, you know, that exists within different communities, but a lot of times it's going to affect how you're affected and how these issues are going to be salient and personal to you when you're in these fights to make them better. And I think that we've gotten in a state where the people who are supposed to be rooting for the most oppressed, the people who are supposed to have our back in office, like the Democrats and everybody, they got millions and millions and millions and millions in the bank. And a lot of times that separates you from the average American experience. And I think that it's important now more than ever when we're in these institutions of higher education, like being on the fast track to being able to be financially stable and be able to have millions and millions in the bank, hopefully one day for many of us. We got to be able to realize that. We got to be able to realize where we come from, who we've come from, or how many people on whose shoulders we stand upon. Because I think that will be one of the biggest forms of activism as it relates to trying to have these conversations about making the changes that need to be made in this country. If we don't include, you know, people with lower socioeconomic statuses, or we don't even bring them up in the boardrooms and the meetings, then where are we really moving? Mm-hmm. You know, the rich are getting rich, yes. So thank you for that question, because that was really good. And I think it's something that we stray away from because it's so stigmatized. And even a lot of times when you have people who are coming and speaking on these different issues, you know, a lot of times they got money in the bank, you know? So we have to be able to have these conversations now more than ever. And I think that plays a role in when we're trying to have conversations with people who necessarily don't get it, and being able to have that empathy and understanding what that privilege looks like, because consciousness doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't. Like, this consciousness of all these different issues, it doesn't just happen overnight. And I use myself as an example, because there have been many times in my life where I have perpetuated sexism, where I have perpetuated ableism, where I have perpetuated even homophobia to my own self, you know, to other people, because I was taught that it was not the way. So we have to be able to point out these privileges and these things and these biases that we have within our own hearts and correct ourselves and understand these different issues to be even able to have a conversation and connect with other people on these issues that they should be aware of and understand too. And I think that socioeconomic status and that privilege and that class like plays a big role in that. So in essence, like if we can just continue to understand, even when you have money in the bank and you think that you may not have a lot of times you're better off than somebody. And so with that privilege, you have to be able to use it as a tool to continue to have these conversations. Because I mean, like many of us have been there before. Many of us have been in the food stamp lines before. But if we get on stage and we don't speak about those experiences, who are we really helping? So I thank all of you all for being here because y'all are helping me, and thank all of you all in the audience too, because this has been a really great conversation, and thank you for that question.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for participating. We are about out of time. I also want to make a special thank you to all of our panelists. They did an extraordinary job of talking about some of the issues that have compelled them to become activists, their encounters with racism and discrimination, their sense of indignation about what they experienced, and their determination to make a contribution and to do something and not to be silent. There are recommendations that we need to be aware of our own attitudes, biases, and assumptions, and also the recognition that it's important for us to broach the contextual dimensions of race, ethnicity, and culture, and have within group discussions and dismantle some of the tensions that serve as barriers to activism. Again, I want to thank each one of them, Peyton, Mo, Laila, Monica, for your contributions tonight, and thank you for coming and your participation. I also want to say to the audience that we will now transition to the Clipper Room upstairs if any of you would like to join us for a reception. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you.